Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Active Transportation Corridor event. Thank you so much for being here. In about 10 minutes, we're going to ask you to come over to this part of the room, and we'll do a 15-minute presentation. And in the remaining 10 minutes, please enjoy walking around and meeting with the committee members. Thank you. And there are lots of seats, as it turns out, in the front, so come over, have a seat.
Or grab a chair and bring it to the side, so if you don't want to be in the front row.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Misha. I'm the Director of Federal Path, and I am leading this awesome team comprised of the study team and supported by the advisory committee. So if you are a member of the study team, could you please wave your hand? Again, Josh, Federal Planning District, and our engineer here, Jan Conley from the from Burlington. Thank you.
Madison.
Madison, thank you, Madison. Madison, where are you?
Here.
Thank you for being here. And if you are an advisory committee member, could you wave your hand? These are a lot of folks from representing the Valley who are volunteering their time for this project, and without the team and the committee, this wouldn't have happened. Thank you, everybody, for really giving you your time and your expertise. I want to thank the Waitsfield Elementary School. Thank you guys for letting us be here. And this is our second meeting today. Today we're going to look at what we've done so far. And Jen is going to take us through it. And before I turn it over to Jen, I just wanted to say that there was a moment in history when this road, 100, was a horse path. And this time of year, the wagons would be sinking in to the axle as the oxen pulled them from village to village. At some point in time, we as civilization had an idea that we need a road for motor vehicles. And we had a will and a way to build a road through this valley. So now, when somebody says, how can we possibly build a bike path? How can we build a shared use path? Well, it's very simple. If we couldn't build a big wide road for cars, we can certainly build a bike path. And what it's really about is about shifting a paradigm, changing our thinking to what is the road. And if we change that and say the road is not just a place where cars and trucks move back and forth. That's a place where people can safely move on bicycles. Children can go to school. Elderly can ride their e-bikes safely. Strollers can be pushed back and forth. So if we collectively imagine that, then it's simple. We have all the technology and all the resources in the world to make it happen. Thank you for being here.
Much. My name is Jen Conley, and I'm with the consulting firm BHP, and we are assisting the project team in the hazard committee in advancing this project. This project was funded by a grant that came from VTrans, and with that grant, they like you to follow a certain process And I'll get into a little bit where we stand on that process today and go over what we've learned so far. But it's really to make sure that we evaluate alternatives, that we create alternatives and evaluate them in light of what the constraints are. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that this quarter is challenging, but Misha and the project team have a wonderful vision, and I hope you all do as well, as to what you think this quarter can be. So today we're going to go over the project schedule, the purpose and need, conceptual alternatives, and then the most important part will be getting some feedback from you folks on those alternatives, whether that's while we sit here raising your hand, we'd love to hear what you have to say, but also as you travel around and talk to people, like really give the advisory committee your input, because they're the conduit back to help us shape the project. Move on to the next slide. So as I just mentioned, our partners in this are VTrans, as well as the CDRPC, the Mad River PAC, and VHB. So the project area, I don't think is a surprise to anyone. It's really the Route 100 corridor, and it travels from Warren to Middlesex, but it's most significantly through Waitsfield and Moortown, and really is seen as a connecting project. And whether that's connecting village centers, or whether that's potentially connecting up to the Harvard Union Middle and High School, it is to connect people. It's to connect people to your downtowns, to economic development, to jobs, and make it so you don't have to choose to use your car. Our schedule is kind of sitting right smack dab in the middle of it. So we started the scoping study last fall, and we met with you all before the holidays to understand what the local concerns were, what were people thinking about. It was a wonderfully attended event. We got a lot of feedback, took a lot of notes. Everybody added their sticky notes and their thoughts to the graphics. We're now at the alternatives presentation discussion, and that really is alternatives that have been developed looking at all of the constraints. And as you look at the boards, I don't think it's any surprise some of the things we're dealing with here. And then from here, we move on to the final scoping report that really identifies a preferred alternative that you all are working towards. And it provides you with some tools for how to implement that preferred alternative. The purpose was identified by the project team and discussed and tweaked at the local concerns meeting. So I won't read all of the purpose and all of the needs, but really quickly I will read the project purpose is to identify a viable route for an active transportation corridor through the Mad River Valley, connecting each of the towns. It will create a backbone for the growing economy, influencing economic development that promotes ecological integrity, equity, and inclusion. And there were particular needs, as I said, that were also identified. And it really is about how to give that alternative to vehicular travel and to unite those communities and to unite the existing trails. So a few takeaways from the local concerns meeting. Obviously, there's a strong desire to be able to bike off of Route 100 or on Route 100, but the fear is that barrier of those high volumes and high speeds keeps a lot of users off of Route 100, and as a result, they don't have an alternative. So how can we give those folks, as I said, even if you're an adult who is a very comfortable cyclist on Route 100, it's unlikely you would want your children to be biking on Route 100. Accessibility is something that was mentioned specifically, and taking advantage of any existing trails, opportunities, and just leveraging what we have to be able to move the project along. And really that a variety of path types and services are acceptable. I do remember hearing the feedback specifically, I don't care if I have to go up a hill, I just don't want to do it on Route 100. So it really is, we're hungry for this opportunity, even if it's not going to be maybe that perfect, there isn't going to be a level path that's paved out there. And we can work with what we've got. So to start with, alternative A identified really what our opportunities were to operate existing paths that are available in the network, really leveraging that in low volume volume roads to see how much of a network we can put together. I'm going to guess those of you who are cyclists and walkers probably already do some of this today. You figure out how you can get where you want to get, or just walk your dog on the places that are easy to do it, that are lower volume roads or existing paths. There would be, in this alternative, raising existing trails to a higher standard that is more acceptable to more people. To do this, though, there are only so many places we can leverage existing or proposed opportunities, one of which is that wastewater alignment, for example. You would still need to be on Route 100 in this alternative. And Route 100, as we know, has very narrow shoulders in some areas. So this alternative is a bit disjointed. But it does also give us efficiency. And the pros and cons, it is a lower cost alternative. It's something that can be done in a relatively short time. And you can incorporate with it more bike route signage to raise awareness of the cyclists. But cyclists would still have to share the road with Route 100 in its current configuration for big segments. Alternative B is shoulder widening. Now, one of the things is, I'm sure most of you noticed, that shoulder width varies significantly throughout the corridor. And so although as a cyclist or a walker, you feel more comfortable with 5 or more feet of the shoulder, that isn't the case in a number of locations. You want to go to the pluses and minuses. So being on Route 100 does provide you with the ability to have the most direct route to the places you're going. You're traveling the same path that vehicles are. It does, because of the way Route 100 standards Route 100 was built to, it does allow you to avoid the steepest grades. As I said, this audience seems to be a little more hardy and less worried about that based on the local concerns meeting. It would certainly improve safety relative to existing conditions, because if you're walking on a shoulder that's only a foot wide, you really do feel every vehicle that passes by you, whereas when it's 5 feet, you can be closer to the edge and feel a little safer, a little more away from the traveling vehicles. The cons would be that the bridges would remain width constrained until those bridges are replaced. And that could be a significant amount of time. In some of the cases, some of the bridges are very old and are likely to be replaced in the short term, but some have been replaced in the 2000s. So we would be waiting a while for some of those bridges to be replaced so that the entire corridor could come up to standards. In addition, this could require some right-of-way acquisition and impacts to natural resources. And that is because when we widen the road, in a lot of cases, again, as you all know, there are steep banks up or down. So those steep banks would need to be shifted out, and you end up chasing that a little bit further then. And so that could then impact some of those adjacent property owners and those natural resources, which we know are very close to Route 100 currently. The riders remain exposed to traffic, obviously still a con there. And it doesn't create connectivity for alternate users, and here we mentioned equestrians and snowmobiles, but it isn't, as I said, really appropriate for all users either, even just pedestrians and bicycles. So in alternative B, the other thing is several miles of this corridor are very tightly constrained. And that's by, there's a fair amount of ledge, that's by the Mad River, and other constraints there, and that makes this alternative significantly more costly, obviously. Now, alternative C is what I like to call the gold standard, and I think, we'll see if you all agree with me, is where we like to work towards, is a shared use path that is separated and adjacent to the corridor. Now, I think that's really what we'd all like to, that's our guiding light and where we like to get to. But again, everything has its pros and cons. So it would be, if it's close to the alignment, it would be that continuous connection between communities and destinations. It would be very safe for trail users of all abilities. You would feel comfortable riding your bike with small children on that path, for example. It would be very aesthetically appealing and more with, I think, with the goals of what the community was looking for. The cons are significantly more expensive than the other alternatives, and that really is around the fact that you're going to be going out of what is already, the established roadbed and clearance area of Route 100 and putting in a significant, new interruption. And because of those right-of-way environmental permitting items we talked about in the wide shoulder alternative, they're even more significant in this case. In addition, there would be a much longer implementation time, just knowing grid sources and the way these things can be built. The more expensive it is, the longer it's going to take. Which again has, similar to traveling along 100, does have concerns associated with that as well, and locating those so that they could be safely done. And here's another example of severe topography. So even if we were able to get permission by an adjacent property owner in this location, where and how that path could be sited is extreme. To say extreme, I can't even say how difficult and how costly it could be, just looking at those walls that were put in to accommodate Route 100. Now, this is a location where the shoulders are more reasonable, but to really think about if you wanted to put a shared use path, where could it go, given there's river on one side and that incredibly steep wall on the other. So we went through an evaluation matrix, and I'm not going to necessarily share with you all of the items in this. As you might imagine, the more green something is, the better. And thinking like a stoplight, red is a challenge. And so here, obviously, total cost, including right-of-way acquisitions if needed, alternative B and C, both very, very high, as we already went over. And those, again, right-of-way impacts, even if it is someone who's friendly, that grading that needs to happen to accommodate, much more significant with that separated path alternative. But as we look at the local and regional drivers and things like bicycle access and pedestrian safety, you see alternative C, is no surprise, is significantly more green than the other two alternatives. So I don't think there's any surprises in these evaluations, but they're important, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions you may have. But that's kind of the evaluation that we do here. There is a huge benefit to an alternative like C, but there is a cost that comes with it. This is impacts as far as to different things such as floodplain, agricultural lands, wildlife. Many of these things are things we would have to evaluate in any alternative as you move forward, especially as you get into permitting, which will be on the next slide. This just alerts. What I would say the takeaway on this slide is there would be some impact to many of these, protected things or things that we need to consider as we move forward with any of these alternatives, but not too much that is a severe impact. It is something that is, you can face it and we can get past it. There isn't a flaw in these. The only thing that it comes up as a severe red is that new impervious surface. And that, of course, would be only specifically with widening around 100. If you are widening an 18-mile corridor, it has a significant impact of runoff of that additional pavement. As far as permitting is concerned, again, no real fatal issue here, but there are nuances. Again, more permitting requirements with alternative B and alternative C. Again, we don't see anything that would stop the project, but it does require more time and more money and perhaps some litigation associated with some of it. So I'm happy to, if anyone has a question afterwards, get into any of the specifics, because we do have notes on all of these items. But that's kind of the overview takeaway for permitting impacts. Now, I'd love to take a minute and get some reaction. One of the things that I want to share with you, I don't want you to think it's new and informative. If you had a chance to look at the graphics, one of the things I think you have probably found is that we've identified certain segments where it would be most appropriate to upgrade an existing path, certain segments where perhaps a shared use path would not be cost prohibitive and could be constructed without significant impacts to things like the river, and then some segments where it would be possibly shoulders as they are today, or looking at widening shoulders in different segments. And I think as you go around the room, you can see those different items called out on the graphics. But what I'd love to do is to get your feedback and your thoughts about the alternatives and any questions that you may have.
Alternative C, have you down in how many crossings? I mean, it is kind of smooth.
That is a concern. I can look it up on the plans.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was, with alternative C, how many crossings over 100 would need to be considered? And I think in the concept, Madison, who worked on that evaluation, thinks it was 5. That is not a final design number, though. That's at this point with our concept, that's what we think it would have to be. You're welcome. Yes?
Building on that, would there be even just a straight road crossing, or was there thoughts of doing bridges, pedestrian access for this? So it becomes a huge benefit of having that separated path, it is a one driver, it is truly the same separate. And so adding a road crossing.
Yeah, so the comment was, to go with that, the benefits of alternative C are that it's a safer alternative, so putting in crossings along 100 kind of defeats the benefit of that, which is a good point, and asked about bridges. Now, what I can tell you is, in a number of cases, I think we can all think of some of them, there are pedestrian bridges that are implemented, but it's usually as a part of very significant fundraising campaigns. Because it's tough to get a grant for them unless you can show there's going to be significant ridership and connectivity and a number of things. It's a very competitive environment. So yes, your preferred alternative can show that, but I would tell you it'll be difficult probably to implement, and that would obviously, maybe you could pick particularly dangerous locations where you think that would be a priority and put that right into the plan, that although we can tolerate in Waitsfield crossing Route 100, we can't tolerate it on this particular curve at this particular point. Welcome. Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment about risk associated with the alternative C.
Yes.
So we identified road crossings. I would highlight that the most likely place where a bicyclist is going to get involved in a car-bike collision is going to be when they're on the shared use path and they're crossing a driveway or a road and they're getting right hooked by the car. So to understand the risk, you need to know how many crossings a shared use path is going to cross. You need to know whether you're going to follow NAPCO standards and how you're going to bring that shared use path towards the road. That ultimately, while crossings can be a risk, they're actually the least likely place for a bike-car collision. And there are a lot of ways in which you can address the crossings through hawk signals and other elements. We see these all around schools, that the biggest concern is going to be driver awareness as they're coming up and turning right, either onto a road or a parking lot, and actually doing a right hook and hitting that bicyclist. So I think it'd be important if you're going to talk about risk to identify the likelihood of risk, so that folks don't necessarily focus on something that isn't the biggest concern.
Yeah, we can certainly go through and make a note of what the number of those, crossing locations would need to be as a that alternative.
Is there a thought on focusing the build out, if it is funded, starting with the areas within a mile of the schools? Because there's a lot, there was federal funding for a long time for safe routes to schools infrastructure, and then it goes hand in hand with what's happening with education in the schools and walk to school days. And so I think in terms of both the spur, but also in all the different centers, like starting to make sure that the path, because then parents can drop off a mile and a half, and actually have active transportation to and from schools and give that opportunity to the kids. So
I think that's great feedback for us to have, because once we develop what the preferred alternative is, we start talking about how to implement it, and that's great input to have. And I think it may tie into some of the other comments to be thinking about. If we do want people to walk or bike that last mile, we want the children to cross, whether it's driveways or whether it's Vermont 100 itself, the fewest times possible. It's a great comment so far. Thank you. Yes,
Is there room for an alternative D?
there is.
Where you focus on alternative C, but where that is unreasonable, utilize alternative B if it already exists. For example, that picture where you have the wall on one side of
It's as if I planted you in the audience, so thank you for that, because that is where I hoped that through our conversation we would get to, because we have the preferred vision, as I said, of a shared use path, but we also have to be grounded in reality and really try to accomplish the best thing that we can for the community. And that is, as we were talking, that seems to be where the project team is thinking, we have a blended landing with the scoping study. While Isha still has his vision, this scoping study, which is really a way to leverage the study to get funding, needs to be grounded in the reality of the here and now and in the shorter term future. And so I do think that there is an opportunity for that. And again, I encourage everyone to look at the 4 segment maps where you will really see where we've identified locations of where existing paths are, as well as locations where we may think about whether it's a shared use path or shoulders, and you can see by the number of constraints identified on that sheet what the constraints are in each segment. So those are some of the locations where we may have more challenges with the shared use path situation. Yes.
To follow up on what you just described, when we're choosing, and just so everyone knows, they're labeled as alternative 1, 2, and 3, but that correlates to A, B, and C. When we're choosing those alternatives, how do those correlate to this opportunity to use various forms where needed? Because we sort of shown what we think is the most practical alignment, and therefore, where we have the orange line following Route 100, is that the place at which we're choosing alternative 1, 2, or 3? Or can you just speak?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So you will get to vote on each of the segments what your vision is, where you'd like us to land. But there is also an opportunity, and we hand out our sticky notes around. There's also an opportunity to make notes about your thoughts about, although that's where you want us to go. If you have thoughts about a hybrid alternative or other things, that's your opportunity to give us that feedback. And you can do that either at the stations or to anyone in the yellow shirt. I mean, it's important for us to hear that feedback if that is something that you are in favor of.
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
I just was wondering if the funding and the plan included encouragement and education, because normally with bike infrastructure, you see like engineering alongside both of those, along with enforcement. And I know at least from biking with my kids along 100 for the last few years that it seems like if more people were using it, it actually then makes it safer. And there's not bike racks like at the recreation area. There's hardly any actually good bike routes in the valley, and so I think even if this took a while to build out, there could be more people using some of the infrastructure that already exists with increased public education around it, so that more people started using these bikes.
We're moving as fast as we can. I'm sure that this project of developing the path and building the path will more in the education. Well, right there we have our first cargo bike. It's one of 3 cargo bikes for the Active Transportation Corridor demonstration project. This is the beginning of our education. Come on, join the committee. Let's do more of it. Just like what Jan said. We have to move from ideal to real. Of course, we want to cross the road over the overpasses or underpasses that animals could also use, right, to cross. Of course, that's ideal. We have to hold on to it, not let go of this. But we got to get started. We will establish the corridor from Warren to Middlesex. Then we can continuously improve this corridor for generations to come. If we don't establish the corridor, there's nothing to improve.
But I do think your point about maybe identifying where bike racks should be or thinking about these other aspects is still important to document in the plan. Because a plan can be used to leverage other kinds of funding as well. If you, have a police department who is applying for funding for additional enforcement, they can leverage that as a plan that's already documented a need toward that goal. So I think it is important to think the other aspects. This project is more about infrastructure, but I do think it is important to still identify those other items. Oh, yes.
Has there been consideration for maintenance of the paths, storage of bikes, and I don't know if wherever you located bike racks, they're going to have to live somewhere. So you're going to need a building at some point. You've already run into some of those issues, I think.
Yes, we've been thinking about it and studying what happens in other places. So best example right now is Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, a 94-mile corridor that now has a very peculiar little machine that's 10 feet wide that can maintain the corridor and piles of gravel strategically placed along the 93-mile corridor. So I biked on this many times and studied and continue to talk to lots of people how it's being done. And our hope is that the Med-River Path will transform itself into an organization that maintains the corridor for the communities and partners with the towns along the way. So it becomes a public-private partnership where there's one entity that maintains the whole corridor.
Back here, I have a question. Lou?
Yes, please.
So let's follow up on this question of maintaining the path. Who's going to maintain the path? Is it the responsibility of the town? I mean, you got a winter, who's going to plow the path? Who's going to repair the path? Who's going to clean up the paths and trash things? Who has that responsibility? The town? Or is there a separate idea for a active corridor department or something that pays, what gets money and pays for this?
Well, the good thing is we have lots of time to figure it out. So right now, we need to imagine what's possible and think about what is the best. So what we're proposing is that the Med-River Path, as an organization, as a nonprofit in the valley, will take care of the path for the communities. And this is just, we're focused right now on the site, right? Let's take things in the right order. Let's determine what we can do. Let's apply for funding to start doing it. As we know from the Sugarbush Access Road path, it takes at least 3 years from the time we get the grant to the moment when we will start construction. So let us apply for funding for the first segment for coordinating with the wastewater project. Let us get this funding, then we have time to figure out how we're going to maintain it. But of course, this needs to be considered into the plan. It's a very good, legitimate question, which is not there yet.
Well, I think it's important to figure out before you move forward.
It is, and as Misha just said, the Med-River Path as an organization, so these folks in yellow shirts here would be planning at this point to take over that maintenance. And over time, we could see if that ends up changing. And I will say that will be something that will be in the scoping study because V-Trans, if they're funding the scoping study and ultimately funding construction, they need to have some kind of an agreement in place as to who will end up being in charge of maintaining it, because they don't want to build an asset that will then fall apart over time because it's not maintained.
And you figure the funding will come from V-Trans?
I think funding will probably come from a number of sources, because I know that Misha is very good at generating excitement, and I'm sure funding as well. But in addition to that, there's V-Trans, there are WARAC grants, there are other Northern Border grants. There's a number of grants that we will identify in the scoping study that I would bet you folks will probably apply for many, if not all of them, each year.
And I wouldn't be so sure, in the short term at least, about federal funding.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Does anyone have any specific input into the sport to the school? Is there kind of a universal thought that that is a good idea?
Yeah.
Okay, that seems pretty, not unanimous, but pretty overwhelming. Okay, and are there particular areas of the corridor that are a priority for improvement? I already heard within a mile or so of the school in each direction, yes?
Well, it kind of comes off of your comment and some of the comments about safe routes to schools. The purpose of this project is a route, but I didn't see much language about users. And so the whole route is going to have a wide variety of users. Some of those users may be more comfortable on the shoulder, and if you're a little kid, you're not. And so I'm curious if you mapped out the types of users from particular centers. So if we took like this spot right here, the Waitsfield Elementary School, and did a circumference of say 2 miles, what that looks like for the users, because that would influence priority areas for improvement. And some areas like this area, if your focus of user groups is basically anyone from age 1 to 100, you're going to look for the safest type of route for them. But if you're closer to Middlesex, then it's more of a connector that's going to have maybe long distance commuters. It's a different type of user, and it's going to have a different type of priority. And so I guess I'm just curious if you look at the different type of user groups to get a sense of where there's concentrations and the diversity of users within those particular areas that would inform how you would go about prioritizing implementation of such a big project.
We haven't, but that is a great suggestion for the project team to think about for that next step, to really, when we are digesting what we heard today and thinking about moving forward, that is a great suggestion to really think of those nodes that we're trying to travel between. Now, you can continue to give us input. I'm going to just very quickly go over, today we're going to continue to collect input. Misha, so does everyone have sticky notes? Where can folks find sticky notes?
All right, let's, sticky notes with Jared at the Welcome Center. Jared, will you wave your hand? You all know Jared. So there are pens and sticky notes. If there's a general note that you want to make, put it on the map that's over on the wall behind us. If it's specific to any of the exhibits, put it right on the exhibit. In addition to that, and most importantly, over with Shannon, would you wave to him, are the beans, brown beans. And so you can grab a handful of beans, in particular 4, and as you go through 4 sections, this is where you would choose for each section of 1, 2, and 3. And then all the committee members are well informed about their particular section of their exhibit. Please come and talk to that at this point. Let everybody go, and please talk to the committee members. And Jen and I are also here. And I want to thank everybody for coming here. All these questions are very, very important. So it's important for us to write everything down and give you answers to all that. And our next meeting is going to be sometime in summer when we finish the study. And the last thing I want to say is what you see, of course, there are many opportunities, right? Besides what's on the maps. But this is where we're at right now. We're showing you where we're at right now. Only trails that we're showing we're going to use are the ones where we either have an easement, never a path, or we have had conversations with landowners who said this is good by us. Taking other places where we are having conversations with landowners or going to have conversations where we don't have an agreement, they're not on the maps. And we give them answer all of your questions. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy some food and walk around and give your input. Thank you.